Today, it's all about graphs. I'm going to show you 2 or 3 different types of graphs that you can build in Home Assistant, and some of these are going to replace what I use in Grafana so that we can use native Home Assistant for displaying our data rather than going out to Grafana to do the same thing. So let's jump right in. So as I started working on this video, I thought I would just be taking Grafana graphs that I've created in Grafana and put them over in Home Assistant and see how that worked out. The more I play with the apex charts, the more I realized I could do some correlation work. I wanted to know how much opening the fridge door or opening the outside door affected temperature and humidity in the house or in the refrigerator or whatever. And correlation using apex charts was exactly the way to do that. I know some of you have asked me about how to do something like that. So what I'm going to do today is build a few apex charts using that correlation effect, and then I'm going to build a few other charts in Home Assistant that are native to Home Assistant and show you how those work. So to keep this from being a super long video, let's get started and start building that stuff out. So before we get started building an apex chart, we need to make sure we install it. So you go over to HACS, that's where it is. It's going to be a front end item, not an integration. So you would come down here and you would actually search for apex charts. And since I already have it installed, it won't show on this list, but it is installed. And you can see that right down here. I have the Apex Charts card, and it's a card that displays advanced graphs and whatnot. So make sure that's installed. If you don't know what HACS is, make sure you watch my video on HACS or the whole Back to the Beginner series that talks about all of the new stuff or all of the getting started with Home Assistant stuff. All right, so I've got that installed already. So we're just going to go ahead and start creating things. And I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to edit the dashboard and I'm going to create a new view. That's what these are. I'm going to call it demo just for funsies. Give it a random icon. I don't even care what it looks like. Let's find a random icon that looks like that and take that out. And then the theme, we'll leave it alone. And we're going to do masonry to start with and save it. And now we have a blank view and we're going to start by adding a card. That card is going to be a grid card. And the only reason I'm using grid cards is that way I can line the graphs up the way I want them. So there's the first grid card. Now, Apex charts are going to require manual YAML configuration. There's no UI for those, which is fine. Don't be scared of YAML. I always think that people get a little overly scared when it comes to doing something with code, but it's really not code. It's just a configuration. So think of YAML as configuration. All right. So with that, we're going to search for a manual card. And I'm going to take the code that I built this with before and we'll talk about it. That way we don't make this video super long. You just paste that code in here. And of course, everything is not lined up the way it should be. So I will have to fix that. Okay, there's our first card. Now I'm going to take this off here. Now, when it does the preview, it kind of cuts it off a little bit. So that's fine. You'll be able to adjust that as you go along. So if I save this now, we'll see our first graph. And I'm going to change the layout here because what happens is everything is centered in this little tiny block. So if I change the layout to sidebar, that gives me more room on my screen to put more graphs. So now it spans the length of the window here so you can see more of it. So I want to point out a couple of things that I will talk about here in the YAML code in a second. First of all, you have this thing called a blur. That's their terminology, or I'm sorry, brush, not blur. That's our terminology for this little slider down here. You can set the width of this or the time frame of this card to whatever you want. And if you enable the brush, which is an experimental feature, you can then slide along here and zoom in to specific areas. For example, this is refrigerator door open versus temperature and humidity. Every time I open the refrigerator door, which are these little yellow spikes right here, I want to see what happens to the temperature and the humidity. It's a couple of reasons. One, does it get super hot in there when the door's open? Does the humidity go up? I always get a little paranoid about leaving the refrigerator door open too long and what it does to what's in there. And I can see right away that even this morning when the refrigerator door was opened a bunch of times, you can see here that the temperature didn't go up substantially. In fact, the temperature actually went down a little bit, but the humidity went up. And so the only effect we're getting when we're leaving the refrigerator door open is a humidity increase. And that's almost immediate. And it's very substantial. So opening the door to a refrigerator, if it's humid at all, it's going to jump up. And the humidity in the fridge typically is in the 20 percent range. And then when you open the door, it goes up pretty high. Okay, so that's that. Let me explain how I did this. And before I do that, one more thing. You can see the minimum and maximum values on this chart. The 88 is the maximum value for the humidity. The 12 over here is the minimum value. And then 44 is the maximum value in this time range. And 32 is the minimum value. That's for this entire chart. And also you'll notice that the door, when it's open, also goes to 20 on the graph. And that was a number I chose to kind of keep it lower than everything else and still make it visible. So let's go in here and let's show you how I did that. All right, let's look at the code. So again, this is going to be, and I'll show you in the code editor, it makes it easier. This is going to be YAML that you can paste in here. And I will try to put the entire code block for all this configuration into my blog post that I'll link in, or that is linked in the description already. All right, so this is grid card stuff up here. We'll ignore that for now. The type of card is the Apex Charts card. That's the one you installed through HACS. The header, I want to show the header. That's true. That's this information up here. And then the refrigerator door is the title. So that's the title. You'll see refrigerator door open versus temperature humidity. That's the title. It's across here, and it's cut off in this little view right here. Let me see if I can make this visible for us better. A little bit better. There we go. Now we can look at it while we're talking about it. Show states false. If I set that to true, you'll see what happens here. The states are actually what your current state is for everything. So 27% humidity, 39 degrees Fahrenheit, and the door is currently at a state of 0, which means it's closed. That just takes up real estate that I don't need, but you can certainly put that there for what your needs are. Graph span is 12 hours. You can set this to whatever you want, but keep in mind it has to load all the data points every time the page loads. So the more data points you have, the longer it takes to load it. And this is a 24-hour span here. So I like to leave it at 12. I don't need to see anything more than that. Now here's where we get a couple of interesting options. The all series config will change the configuration for all of these series in here. So if I want a stroke width of, and that's the line width, of 5, it's going to make those lines super thick. I don't like it like that. So I want it to leave it as 1. The opacity is 1. You can make those the opacity a little bit less. So you'll see here it's a little bit harder to see because it's a little bit lower in opacity. But I'm going to leave it at 1. It defaults to 1. I don't even think you need to put that in there, but I just left it in there for show. And then show in brush true. That means all of these series here will be in the brush. Now, if you only wanted the brush to show one of these, you would take it out of here. So if I took it out of here, and I would have to put it down here. Let's say I only wanted when the door was open to show in the brush. I would say in brush, true. And now down here in the brush, the only thing you're going to see is when the door is open. And you can kind of slide over to where that door activity is if you want to just zoom in on that section. So you could do it either way. It's really up to you how it's done. And then what we have up here, those are all of the series that apply to every series in here, and each one of these entities is a series. And then finally, experimental brush is true. If you don't have that enabled, then this little section down here will not show up. Again, it is an experimental feature, but I found that it works just fine, so I use that. And then each one of these series is what you want to display on the chart. One thing I will talk about on the door sensor is that I want to be able to see this show up where it's visible to me. And the door sensor actually is either on or off, which doesn't show on here as a number. So what we do is we do what's called a transform. And we transform the word on to a numeric value. And I set it to 20, but if you're doing a transform, you can do whatever you want. So if I set it to 90, of course, it overrides a little bit some of this. I could set the opacity of the door series to a little bit less, so it's kind of muted and everything else is easier to see. But I just chose to keep it low. Typically in the refrigerator, the temperature and humidity will not be below 20. So having this set to 20 gives me a good indication of when the door is open, and it also allows me to see all of these other values as well. So when you're taking a transform or you're taking a binary value, you can actually change that binary value to a numeric value to display on this graph. And because it's time series, it will show on the graph at the time it actually occurred. And then we have our temperature and our humidity. Now the extremas is what I was talking about before. Extremas show you these values here, 44 and 32. Those are the high and low extremas for that particular series. So the temperature has a max of 44.1 and a minimum of 32.5. And the humidity has a minimum of 12 and a maximum of 88%. All right, so let me put this back to 3 columns because we're going to add another chart here. That is basically the apex chart where I do the correlation. Now the next chart I want to add is going to be a different type of chart. And again, it's still an apex chart. So I'm going to use a manual type of card. And I'm going to grab my data. By the way, all of the options for these charts are on the GitHub page, and there are a lot of options. If you just look at all of this, these are all the things that you can do with these apex charts. And I'm not going to cover all of that obviously today, but what I am going to cover is the couple different types of charts. And this is going to be the radial bar chart. And it shows my outdoor temperatures, humidity, and the real feel or the feels like temperature. So what's different about this card is in an all series config, the only thing I have here is a max of 120 because the temperature outside may reach higher than 100 degrees and the chart defaults at 100. So I need to make it a little bit higher than that. And then I have my entities here. If we look at that, this is what it looks like. So you have the temperature, the feels like, and then the humidity. And you've got the values down here. You got the title up here. And then you got a good indication of where everything fits relative to each other. This is a good chart if you want to see how different values are placed side by side in a different kind of view. I don't know if it's super useful in all cases, but I thought it was fun to play with and kind of show. So that one's super simple. I'm going to change these number of columns to 2 because we're going to do 2 columns per section here. And now you can see that the data shows up a little bit better. Okay, so I've got 2 cards here in a single grid. I'm going to add a second grid card, which is going to put it below the other ones. And the same process applies. I'm going to add a manual card, and we're going to paste in the data for that manual card. All right, that's pasted in there now. We'll talk about it. I'm going to make this 2 columns, but for show real quick, I'll make it 1 column so we can see this card while we're talking about it. Again, this is a custom apex chart card. Now this one I did a color list, and on this one with the color list, what it does is it puts these colors on here. You can choose which colors you want to assign to the various series, and it'll put them up there in order of the series. The header is true, which is this one right here. There's the title. The show states is false. Colorized states is true. This one's a 24-hour span. And then my stroke width again is 1 for all of the series, and the opacity is 1, which is default. We shouldn't even need to put that in there, but I left it there for show. Series, each one of these is a series. Now this is a front door opening versus the temperature and humidity both upstairs and downstairs in the house. I want to know the effect of opening the door and whether that changes the temperature and humidity. So we can see here that I have the transform for this. It shows me again the door being opened and closed. And then we have show legend false. So I don't want the legend over here to show up. I don't need a value showing on the door. And then our sensors are all our temperature and humidity sensors for upstairs, downstairs with our extremas. And then I change the name because if you don't change the name, it's going to pull the name from the sensor name. And I want to give it a name that fits on the screen. And so you'll see when this is not in this little window here, it actually fits on the screen better. And then I put my 4 sensors on there. So let's put that back to 2 for now, save it. And you'll see that this card now sits below these 2 because I'm on a second grid card. Okay, so we have 2 apex charts that are correlation, that I call them correlation. And we have 1 apex chart, which is radial chart. I'm going to show you one more type of apex chart. Actually, I'm going to show you 3 more types, but I'm going to show you one more type on this row here. So let's go ahead and I will add that in and we'll talk about it. Okay, so I did another manual card and I added this one in. It's has a color list of green and blue, although there's only 1 color, and I'll show you this blown up here in a second. All this stuff is the same. Graph span is 24 hours. This is a standard Apex chart with only one series on it, and it's my energy for my refrigerator. The difference is this one is a type of area. This series is actually an area versus a line. So let's look at that now. And you can see what the difference is. Instead of having a line like this, you now have an area that's filled in like this. And what this is showing me now is how long my fridge is running. Obviously, I need to go defrost it again because it looks like it's been running for a long time here and it shouldn't run that long. But this gives me a good indication of that runtime. But it's also another way that I chart something in Grafana that I've pulled over here into Home Assistant natively, because this is just on a Home Assistant dashboard. So that's 2 more charts. Let me do another couple of charts for the Apex charts. So that's 2 more charts. I'm going to do one more series of Apex charts, and then I'm going to show you a couple of native Home Assistant charts, which are also great. I'm going to put the next 2 cards in this, and then we'll talk about them whenever I've got those put in. So I've added 2 more charts. One is a scatter type chart. It has green and blue for the color list. And then we have show states true. That's where we see the wind direction up here. So we're actually seeing the state this time in the header. The graph span is 12 hours, and then stroke width and opacity is both 1. And then we have our wind direction. What I'm showing with this is our actual wind direction. It'll be easier to see in just a moment when I go into the main graph. And then over here is our final Apex chart that I'm going to show today. It's green and blue for the list, although it only uses green because there's only one color right now. 12 hours, and then it uses a wind speed. So looking at these together, you can now see I like to plot my wind direction over time. And these little plots right here, or these little circles, are all the different wind directions that it's noted out of my weather station. And you can see whenever there's a wind shift, it's kind of cool to watch when there's a cold front coming through and the wind shifts to a different direction. Right now, it's mostly from the south. But in the wintertime, you'll see it shift to the north, and you'll see it go to either 0 or 360 degrees. And then my wind speed gives me an indication of how much wind is actually blowing outside. And those both come from my weather station in the backyard. Okay, so that's all of the Apex charts I'm going to show you today. The sky's the limit on these things. You can do all kinds of things with those Apex charts. I'm going to show you a native Home Assistant card or chart now called a history chart or history graph. And this is really neat because you can plot things over time. And you see this a lot when you're looking at your entities in Home Assistant. What's neat is I spent a lot of time building this out in Grafana for what I'm about to show you, and it's super simple in Home Assistant. So this is going to be HVAC. I'm going to show, let's do 24 hours, with a refresh interval of 60 seconds, so once a minute. And my entities are going to be HVAC states. I had to build out all of this stuff in Grafana, and I had to store it in the database from Home Assistant when it changes state and all kinds of stuff. Here's the history graph. Just like that, we have a history graph. And you can just hover over each of these sections. It tells you when the HVAC state is in cooling, and it would show you when it was in heating if it was cold enough for that, which definitely is not right now. And it shows you when it's idle. So this is a really neat way to look at your history on this graph. I'm going to do one more history graph because it's kind of neat. This one's going to be my Rokus. All my Roku devices. Hours to show 24. Again, 60-second refresh. And I'm going to look for all of the Roku media player. Okay, so we'll save that one. And now we have, each thing that was playing on the different Rokus around the house. So that's neat. And they're very fast. They render very fast. You notice how quickly that stuff pulled up. It's because a lot of work has been done on the back end to be able to pull history stats very quickly. All right, so one final chart that I'm going to show you today is going to be a stats chart, statistics graph. And this is kind of neat. I'm going to call this one outside temperature. Days to show is 30 for now. You can show them hourly or daily. I'm going to show daily. And then my entity that I want to use is outside temperature. So you can chart on this statistics graph card a period of 5 minutes, hour, day, month. You can show types like this, mean, min, max, or sum. And you can do linear or bar. So I've got 30 days, and this is kind of neat when you do this on a daily basis. Let me do 180 days. And it's very, very fast. I'll just save that. And now you can look down here. Over time, my outside temperature, what has happened over that period of 180 days, you can see kind of trending. If you want to go more granular, you can say 7 days and do it on a daily basis or even an hourly basis. And looking at it for the last 7 days, this is the mean, max, and minimum temperature. So if I want to see my max temperature for the last 7 days, you can look at it this way. If I want to see the mean temperature for the last 7 days, you can do it this way. And of course, if you want to see the minimum temperature, you just cross out the other two. And those are my minimums. But when you put them all together, you have a really neat graph that shows statistics for whatever device that you want to use. So those are a number of graphs. If we say done, by the way, up here, now all of the editing boxes go away. We have our correlation between opening the fridge door and the temperature and humidity, what our outdoor temperature is on a pretty looking radial graph. You've got front door open versus temperature, humidity in the house, your fridge runtime, wind direction, wind speed, your HVAC states, your Roku active applications and how long they ran, and then a statistics graph based on outdoor temperature. That's a lot of cool stuff you can do with graph. Do I need Grafana anymore? I may not. I may want to just load everything up in native Home Assistant apps. The Apex chart is a very good chart option for being able to take some of the stuff that I've done in Grafana and put it over into Home Assistant. The history and statistics graphs are excellent in Home Assistant. They're natively built into Home Assistant. You don't have to install anything extra. Those render very fast and have a lot of data. Any data that you're storing in Home Assistant long-term can be displayed on those graphs like that. All right, let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below. If you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing to the channel. If you're not a member, please support me in joining the channel. Thank you for watching, and we will see you on the next video.